Seriously?
I got injured.
Oh.
You have to hit the button.
It's like a real investment.
Yeah.
I can't.
You might help. There you go.
Oh, do you like that little thing?
Oh, the pop sock every time.
Yes, because I
She's just gonna open up the EDI statement. She just,
Okay, that's great.
really like it.
and then I have the RFP ready to be shown, the consultant stuff
That's great. Thank you, Helen.
on a separate thing.
Oh. But imagine writing it in, 2 years. It came out 2 years ago, and then being in the midst of the storm. Yeah. But the book has been it's selling. People are reading my book.
This is, how are you? So thanks very much, everyone, for coming. We'll get started in just a moment once the EDI statement is up.
It won't, it's not, the public can't see you right now, so you gotta hold off a second.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
that's all right.
Best laid plans.
Did you interact with any of the ambassadors that were here in town?
Thank you.
Acknowledge also that the Boston Public Library's Central Library stands on land that was once a water-based ecosystem, providing sustenance for the indigenous Massachusetts people, and is a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We're committed to land acknowledgement for all locations at which we operate. We reaffirm this commitment to set the context for our planning, deliberations, public engagement, so that they take place from the spirit of welcome and respect found in our motto. Next, Pamela, should we proceed with roll call?
Yes. All right, I'm gonna just read your last names. Berman.
Here.
Brooks.
Present.
Cheryl Cronin is absent. Carolyn Crockett is absent. Ron Dorsey.
Present.
Leonard.
Present.
Masso.
Present.
Seiki.
Present.
Soraf will be absent. Westra. We have a quorum.
Excellent, thank you. And the last procedural item, we circulated a copy of the minutes from the last meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
I saw it.
There we go.
Before we get into the substance of the meeting, I also wanted to acknowledge the passing of Mel King, who I know was someone close to a lot of people's hearts here and a mentor to Priscilla, among others. I never knew Mel personally, but he just seems like a remarkable person, and it's a real loss for the city and for the state. I'm not sure, Priscilla, if you got any particular
Well,
recollection.
he certainly was a giant of a man.
Mm-hmm.
And his nickname was Mel Hugs King. Everybody knows that. And he loved to hug, and he used to give out these little
stickers that said HUD. And
Do you believe that love is the question?
Question and the answer.
and love is,
The answer, yeah.
so,
I'm really pleased to see that his book that he wrote is people are beginning to see that, buy it. It was reissued and it's a really, really great book. Talks about community building.
it's really a blueprint for community building, but it's also a history of the city. And then the final thing is that, I mean, I go way back.
Mel King, he gave me my first job out of Northeastern.
Mm.
I was
With them when we threw the garbage.
You were there.
I was there.
You know, last Tuesday, was it, Ron, we were together? So last Tuesday, Colette Phillips and Get Connected gathered community members to celebrate what she called, Boston's influential men of color. Ron and I were there celebrating. My son was one of those who was celebrating as, chief of human services. He knew about Mel's passing before he got there. And he purposely said to me after they announced it, I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to ruin the night for you. And I was make the night heavy, right? And he said to me, and I also didn't want to tell you because if you were going to speak at any moment, I didn't want you to get emotional. Clairvoyant that he was, because I was called out to speak by Philip Martin. And then it was afterwards that they were ready to make the announcement. He leaned over and says, Mel died. And I teared up. I broke up. I was like, because he really was a giant. And he opened so many doors for so many of us to get engaged as activists. And if you remember, that campaign of '83, the Rainbow Coalition, that was my first campaign ever in any type of electoral process. And that idea of diversity coming together, diverse groups come together, progressive groups come together and make a change was just like, why didn't we think about this before? But you're right, his legacy will live on. Somebody that we're gonna always embrace in what we do. I hope younger generations will continue that as well. I think they will. I think that he'll be missed.
Yeah.
Be missed.
Well, he will be remembered.
Oh.
Our staff pulled together a book list celebrating his life and his own work. So that's now available on our website. Just a small gesture from the library of recognizing not just his own writings, but of peer writings and others who've contributed to writings on the struggle for a better Boston and a more inclusive Boston. I met him through the South End Technology Center in my first role here as Chief Technology Officer. Because he was the founder of the South End Technology Center, and they were connected to the Timothy Smith Network, which was a big partner at the time. I vividly remember meeting him without knowing who. I mean, I knew his name. I did not know I was newer to this world at that time. He quizzed me on everything about technology. But I looked him up later. Now I get it. Now I get it. So. Just the amazing spirit that I learned about through others, his contributions to what Boston became. And in my sense is that people treated him as if he was actually mayor of Boston all those years ago. So that's how I encapsulate the little part of who I knew who he was and his significance.
Is his protege's book on the book list, Carolyn Crockett?
It is.
yes.
Good. All right.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for all those wonderful recollections. And delighted again to have everyone here today. I know there have been some discussions with a number of members of the committee on the draft RFP that we've pulled together. And I think the main goal of this meeting is to try to get this in a position where we can finalize the RFP in relatively short order and then get it posted to continue this process. But I thought it would be helpful as an initial matter for Lisa and David just to share general perspectives on how this RFP process will play out, what the timing is, what we should expect, so that we have a sense of that.
I can just interrupt you for 1 second, just a logistic that the administrative thing. This meeting is being recorded, and if any member of the public would like to sign up for that's online that would like to sign up for public comment, please do so in the chat by 4:30. Thank you.
Thanks.
Reading glasses. Sorry. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry. Yep. So an RFP for the city of Boston is made up of several sections. I want to say about between 5 and 7. The part we're looking at today is part B, which is the specifications, which outside of the RFP process, those of us who in consulting would call the scope of services. So really, what is the thing? So that's what you'll be commenting on today. There will also be an additional component for this committee to consider, which will be sort of the specifications that are the scorecard that we will use to rate potential people who have responded to the RFP. So the RFP process, it happens in 2 parts. Well, it happens in many parts, but what happens is you post the RFP, people respond, you review the RFP, score it, and then and only then do you look at the pricing. So just wanted folks to understand that it's a price blind process, so that you're only looking at the pricing for the most advantageous. So that sort of levels the playing field a little bit.
Meaning, sorry, this is
Yeah.
meaning the pricing that various applicants are proposing, or the pricing that we're proposing that they receive?
Good question. So when we put the RFP out, there will be a budget not to exceed X dollars.
Yeah.
And when the respondents submit their response, they will put their pricing in a separate document that we will not
I see,
see
okay.
until after we've graded all of the RFPs.
There's been some talk about whether, because we're a public institution, that there would be consultants that might be willing to do this on a pro bono or reduced fee basis. How would that fit into all of that?
It's a good question. One I would need to consult with our colleague over at the city, Caroline Driscoll, who is our ethics person. Having been a consultant, I always get a little bit leery about pro bono.
Sure.
Because you really do get what you pay for.
No, I understand, totally understand that.
Clients.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that, but.
Yeah, and I can find out more about that.
Yeah.
I have seen proposals in other contexts that were deliberately priced at a very low level in order to, feel like it was a contribution. But because of the process that Lisa just outlined, we would not know that until we have scored the.
That was sort of my main question, yeah.
So it's not set up to facilitate a pro bono submission.
Right. Okay.
So to walk you through super high level, the process is about a 10-week process, start to finish. It starts with an advertisement. The city would post an ad in the City Record and the Boston Globe, which is the paper of record for the city. That's open for 2 weeks. And then about a week and a half after that ad goes up, they would post the RFP at the portal. There's a supplier portal off of boston.gov. Anybody responding to the RFP must apply through that portal. Just to be clear, it's a very, very centralized process. So there are a couple of things that happen while the RFP is open. People need to be able to submit questions to us, have them responded to, and all of those answers are also posted at the supplier portal so that anybody who has downloaded the RFP, it levels the playing field. They all see the answer to the question. And following that, you've got a recommended week and a half before the RFPs are due, because sometimes the answer to somebody's question makes you materially change how you're responding to the proposal. Following
That period of questions, who determines that?
Because I've seen
To go from 7 days, it could be 5 days, it could be a week.
The recommendation from our procurement office is that the questions are due on a Monday, that we respond within 48 hours. And when we respond, we send those back to the procurement office, who will then post them 2 days later. So it's a total of 5 days from the questions being submitted to the answers being
But the
posted.
total period of time in which we respond to questions, are
It's
you
about
saying that's?
48 hours. It should be quick.
I think what she's asking is,
How many days, how long is that period where people can ask questions?
Oh, understood, sorry. I didn't mean to be dense. So the RFP would post on a Monday, and there would be a 2-week period prior to questions being due.
So
That gives folks the opportunity to review the scope, start their proposal.
2 weeks is posted, you're reviewing it, and then you ask the question 2 weeks later, and then how many days is that question period?
So you can submit a question at any point in the process. They would be due 2 weeks after they're posted, after the RFP posts, and the answers would be posted that Friday.
So total is 3 weeks.
Total of 3 weeks.
And then, so responses are posted, and then people have an extra week and a half, you said?
Yes, if they need to adjust it all. So once that happens, the RFP responses would be due. Our procurement office likes to work on Mondays and Wednesdays because it gives just a little bit of extra breathing room. So if the responses were due on Wednesday, whoever the scoring committee is would receive those that Friday. There'd be about a 2-week period of scoring. And by the way, the scoring period, that's up to us, how long we want that to be. Procurement recommends about 2 weeks for the scoring process and other conversations. There may be a scenario where we want presentations. We want people to actually come in and present to us. That would also happen during this scoring period. So once that's closed, once we've sort of just, everyone's filled out their scorecard and the scores are tabulated, if there's no further follow-up, that's when the pricing gets opened. And we can start drafting an award letter as soon as 24 hours after that. So it's a total of about 10 weeks. You can shave off a day or two here or there, but my colleague Jane in our procurement office recommended this as sort of what seems to work the best. So happy to entertain questions.
Do we have any idea in the past, like how many folks would respond to something like this?
It's a good question and it varies. So when you advertise, as I said, it goes in the city record, it goes in the Globe. It will also go to, what do they call it, Combi, which is the state's procurement portal as well. In addition, though, we would all want to amplify it to our own networks. And we would do that by forwarding along the link to the supplier portal. Just to be clear, nobody should be forwarding documents. That gets really confusing. It should just be the link so they can keep everything very centralized. But we would plan on there's a space on the bpl.org website where we post RFPs routinely. And then, we can invite people to go to the portal and download the RFP and check it out.
in personal social media, like LinkedIn?
Should be fine. Should be fine.
Like, or
Because you're pushing them to a centralized place
yeah, right.
to make sure that it's a blind process.
Yeah, that was a question that I had. It sounds like, we all have our own networks of acquaintances and professional contacts, but it sounds like it's fine to let people know about this, provided they're directed to the public portals.
In addition, the RFP, as soon as we're sort of getting ready to go, we will also let Boston's Equity Board know, and they will solicit some vendors that are on their list as well and make sure that they are invited to apply. 100%. Yes. Yes.
Is there any kind of assistance once folks get in the process, because the procurement process at the city is not very easy. If you've not been a bidder before, that could be the first frustration to you bidding at all. So just want to make sure that there's some place for folks to go if they've got questions about the process.
Great, and I believe that the sort of boilerplate documents that make up the rest of the RFP will have information about where people can go. Thankfully, this is a slightly less technical proposal than it would be if you were bidding, for example, a construction job or a development job. This is pretty straightforward.
And if I understand, so how many finalists are there? I mean, And do you have a range
Sure.
of,
So
of how many you might expect?
to the second question, no. It could be a lot, it could be a handful. It really varies on, it really depends on how well we publicize the availability of the RFP. So, I've cast about for consultants and sometimes I've gotten inundated and sometimes I've gotten 3, so it really can vary.
But inundated is 200 or 50?
Inundated for me was about 20. And that was communication, so it's pretty straightforward. So when you're scoring, you use a ranking system, and it was recommended to me sort of think about it A, B, C, D, F. And then at the end, you come up with a number and you would sort of choose your highest, the handful of highest scores and then look at them by price. But you'd want those scores to be equivalent.
So,
So if you've got a bunch of, I'm sorry, Joe.
yeah, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you've got, 395s, open the pricing on all of those. But if you've got, a 95, a 95, and an 85, you're probably not going to look at the 85.
Okay, that was my next question, which is how price back, you can tell I'm a price shopper, right?
100%.
So, how the amount of the bid factors into this, and it's really at the very end, it does factor in. So when you're comparing, like if you have 2 high scores, maybe a third that's close to high, but not quite the highest, you can then take a look at pricing.
Right. Because the way the process is designed, it's to ensure that you get, the best for what you're asking for.
Although if the best, based upon the scoring, turns out to be incredibly more expensive
Yes.
than the others, we have the opportunity to review that and make sure that's what we want, or is the second that's more price sensitive was still the best value? Because the goal is, what is the best value for the institution? Which is neither purely about the dollars nor purely about the substance.
Sure.
And is the thought that we would review the proposals?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Heidi. I think we should talk about that. One option would be to have a subcommittee of people who are willing to devote the time to read these and score them. I don't know that we need every single member of the committee to be a part of that. And it might be a bit more efficient to have a smaller group, but I would certainly welcome anyone's involvement who'd be interested in doing that.
Sometimes the more there are, the more people you need. I don't know if it's 50. I
Yeah,
don't know, with 3 looking at.
yeah, that's fair. I guess we should see how many we get. I mean, I would be somewhat surprised if there were 50. I mean, I'm completely guessing here, but I suspect we're gonna get like between 10 and 20. Maybe.
Well, Paula, you've been through this recently, haven't you?
Yeah.
Didn't you have a?
No, public markets,
different.
public markets.
Under 10, I bet.
Okay.
I would say 7. That's my guess. I was thinking 7.
So I'm doing a lot of recruiting. But it's different.
Pretty broad here,
Yeah.
consultant, so.
Ron, do you have a comment too?
Yes, I may be skipping ahead, but in the scoring, is there the opportunity to wait for the equivalent of MWBE firms and maybe to also wait for culturally proficient experience?
So that would actually be in the criteria that section B I was talking about. So you can, you set forth your criteria and, you can say that, MBWE certification weighs a little bit more or accounts for more points. So we set those criteria. So in short, yes.
Lisa, going back to how we advertise and or communicate writ large, you mentioned the equity office. Is that a pro forma way that we do it with them, or is there a purposeful connecting with Shagun Shop and saying, we are about to launch this? We want to make sure it's on your radar screen so that therefore as many people, diverse organizations are able to participate.
So my understanding is that the equity board takes its work very seriously and does have a list of contractors, for lack of a better word, but consultants, there you go. I do think, though, that we'll need to do a little bit of legwork ourselves. So yes, it is intentional. But if the city doesn't know about them, then the board would be sort of blind to it. So I think we should all be really thinking about our networks. It's a good question.
Question for clarification, did you say that the that piece goes into Part B specifications, or is that in the boilerplate piece? The other parts of this RFP, what section does it go?
It goes into the criteria section, which is section B.
Oh,
It's not in the boilerplate.
okay, and we have that done.
We have not written the criteria. Well, we have some criteria, yeah. We haven't pulled it out to the section yet.
We have some, but we don't have the other wraparound pieces.
There's like an A and a B for this RFP?
There's an A, there's a,
We don't
Right, so
need to
there
worry about
are
anything.
many different parts.
Yeah.
We drafted Part B, which appeared to me, and I think Lucy, you agree, to be the most substantive and the one that
Correct.
this group really opine on. And as to the question of criteria,
yes.
Section
Priscilla, I
6.
mean, there is a section
see that,
4
yes.
is competencies, and we can get into the details shortly.
Okay,
There's also reference made, Lisa, to this minimum evaluation criteria,
Right.
which I have no idea what that is, but maybe.
Christian, would you like him to scroll this up so everyone's looking at it?
I would, but why don't we let's be systematic in the way that we go through it so that we're not jumping around too much. So I guess, could you, Lisa, maybe answer the question of selection criteria?
Sure.
Is there a standalone piece that is used for every RFP, or
No.
how should we think about that?
We would define that. We would
Okay.
define the criteria
So
ourselves.
years of experience in business would be an example of a criteria.
How is that different from the competency
Sure.
section?
So the competency section is,
Which is section
yeah,
4 in
thank you.
Part B.
So there's sort of minimum requirements, you need to meet these things for us to even consider you. But then the criteria section is a little bit more detailed, right? So that is effectively our scorecard. We would probably pull out many of these competencies into the other section and flesh them out a bit.
Okay, yeah, I don't really understand the interplay as well, but I suppose if it's based on the competencies, then we can.
Yep.
Read it in the document. Okay, so that's really helpful, Lucy, to give an overview of the process and the related considerations. One thing that jumped out to me, obviously, is that it's a 10-week process, and I think we all want to get the show on the road. So my goal would be to try to finalize whatever the substantive pieces that we need to finalize, and then leverage the expertise, Lisa, of you and your team, the procurement experts, to try to make sure that we get this out as soon as we reasonably can. And with that, I would propose that people are open to it, just maybe going through this, and I can highlight the approach that we've taken and some questions that we had. And I'd welcome thoughts as we go through it. I know a lot of us have already talked about this to some degree, but Pamela, if you wouldn't mind starting from the front, or from the top rather.
Jay, can you start at the beginning?
Okay, so this is based on the collective input of the committee so far. It's also based on a model template that was used in another recent RFP. So we begin by just, as an overview, talking about what we're looking to do here. We mentioned the fact that the last formal strategic plan was in 2011, and that there's an interim roadmap that was developed in 2019. And I think what I heard people say the last time we met was that one of the key questions we wanted to answer was what it means for the BPL to be a leading 21st century urban public library. And we talked about how the goal is to create a plan that could be used by the Board of Trustees and the staff, and be something that's actually usable and points to things that we're going to do and not do. And then we provide a bit more detail on the history of the BPL and some of the key statistics. And Lisa, if you wouldn't mind looking at that or having someone look at that and just confirm it's all accurate.
Absolutely.
I'd appreciate it.
I can't hear that. What, do what?
Oh, I was just asking Lisa to confirm the last paragraph of the last full paragraph on the first page, which provides some detail on the history of the VPL and the current.
Okay, stop for a second. You can go back a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, we have an updated version of that.
Right.
Yes.
In any case, it seems like that's just a matter of confirming a few last points. So then we get into section 1. Any comments at all on the overview? Just general overview, but how did you get that?
Yes, I was just wondering where things like the event spaces and like the cafe and the WGBH stuff, if that, is that totally separate or is that?
It is actually, so the event spaces, that is TCA, the Catered Affair, so they're an external partner. And WGBH as well is also an external partner. David, correct me if I'm wrong, but that would not necessarily be part of the strategic planning process because we already have contracts in place.
We do, but to the extent that there's guidance, I think, that comes out of our work together that shapes the future direction of that. I think that could be informative. So I wouldn't exclude it, but you can't make a decision to say, we will stop using TCA and use someone else, for example. But I think like the revenue, for example, from our events, from our special events business is a strategic asset. It is a strategic use of the McKim building. It provides, $2 million in revenue. A good deal of that's profit. It pays for stuff that we get to do. So I think it factors into it. But no, it's governed by a 5-year renewable contract, and it so has its own procurement process.
So I think to me, I was just thinking about like what might be missing from the overview.
Describing.
And so either this section right here or the second section, because we talk about funding comes from different sources. I think that is a little different than the Friends groups. So I might also say, and there's kind of earned income from,
Okay.
Partnerships with WGBH and event space.
Great point.
I think it's part of the description of the kind of 21st century libraries,
Yeah.
what.
Right,
Yeah.
because it's not the part of the project scope.
It's not part of the
Yeah,
project
those are
scope, yeah.
important relationships, and it's a good point to raise. And I do think that that's something that we should think about as we undertake the broader process. I've heard, which others may have heard as well, that the Catered Affair arrangement makes it very difficult for organizations to host events here because it's extremely expensive, almost incredibly so. So that may be something to consider if we're looking to make the library more accessible and more of a place for people to use the hosting things.
But I guess, Heidi, my question would be, do you think that it's important that we mention it here, or do you think it's something down the road when we have a consultant in place and we're talking more generally about the library that, we talk about it in that context? Or do you think it's important to have it here?
I think it's important to try to describe the fullness of
Sure.
the offerings.
Yeah.
Before, in the section before section 1.
Right, so
Just
someplace in that.
a couple of phrases, like maybe after the Leventhal Math and Education Center.
I think that's a good suggestion. I think that's exactly where it goes to
Sure.
address some of the.
Because we want people to be thinking about the full scope of the library. And
Yeah.
whatever we do, we're going to be talking about their suggestions are going to be amplifying things, leveraging things, coordinating them,
The messaging of certain things,
because
people who walk by don't.
know that GBH is not part of the library. It looks like the library to them,
Right.
right?
And then,
In Ashmont, when we open up some of the other branches that have
into
entertainment or some other things like that, or access.
Yep.
So maybe we just add a sentence there, sort of as the second, the
Like
penultimate.
strategic
Yeah,
partnerships
we have strategic.
include.
You've already, have you, I don't know who is.
So I'm
responsible for that.
happy to hold the pen. I think what I'm hearing you suggest, Heidi, is that we add a sentence at the end of the last
A phrase.
full paragraph about the key strategic
Yep.
initiatives. So I'll do that. Lisa's going to otherwise vet it. Does that work?
But
It
it
also is going to get us back to the competencies of
the
whoever, to the competencies, because the person has to have that
financial,
financial wherewithal.
They're gonna be able to need to think about what is a strategic asset, what are the finances, what are the revenue streams, whether or not they,
Period. I won't say anything more about that.
but I think that's,
Great,
And
add.
I would just call it earned
Huh?
revenue. There's, in addition, there's an earned revenue stream through events management and WGBH partnership.
And for our benefit, GBH is a subcontractor to TCA for that space. So,
Oh, so TCA, all,
except it's two separate contracts and two separate bidding arrangements. And where I thought you were going with GBH, but you clarified, was the fact, and this doesn't, I didn't find this in here either yet, but our ability to have strategic partnerships as part of our general service model and outreach, I think is an essential dimension to how we reach the community. So yes, clarifying the earned revenue, just like a museum or other cultural institution, but equally the strategic partnership opportunity.
and maybe down the road, in 5 years or 3 years, whenever those expire, the results of the strategic plan will be like, well, if no nonprofits can afford, no nonprofits with less than $10 million in revenue can afford to host an event, then, you know, maybe that's a consideration.
And yes, there's complications to the revenue generating stream, but I think there are also, and we have baked in more to the existing contract opportunities for ease of access. I think, but maybe, but yes, I agree that it could be that at the next review point, that balance needs to shift even more, for example.
Or at least it's just considered. is
Yeah.
kind of what I would say.
And I think I would want a bidder to understand that the library is an extended enterprise organization. So there's some things that it's built core capacity to do. There are other things that it partners with folks to do because they've got better and complementary capacity to do them. And to the extent that it will continue to be an extended enterprise organization, needing to think about what's the configuration of relationships that help it pursue its mission.
Agreed.
Extended enterprise, I'm writing that down.
I love that. I think that kind of language probably needs to be in there,
as
you know, the strategic partnerships,
ships, that
that idea. We're asking, what does it mean to be a 21st century library? Well, there are some criteria
we,
already know that we want.
the piece that, the strategic,
Piece of the collaborations, and also, what's that term?
Extended enterprise.
I love that.
Yes,
Yeah, that's perfect.
thank you.
Good. All right, those are great suggestions. So we'll add the sentence on strategic partnerships and the concept of extended enterprise organization. I think that should address that point. And then we get into section 1, which is project scope and rationale. Here we talk about the 4 pillars of public library service philosophy we've discussed before with David and others. We highlight some of the key ways in which the library impacts people. But I think one of the things that came through during the last meeting was that notwithstanding everything the library is doing, a lot of the members of the community don't have a great sense for how the library could enrich their lives and what the library is doing. And so it seems like a core part of this project is helping the library to focus and helping to get the message out as to what is happening here and all the great things that are happening here. So I wouldn't say section 1 is necessarily the most, we're not really developing criteria as to what we're looking for, but it's helping to frame the problem and helping to describe the scope of the review.
Can we, one of the things in terms of it's historically organized, we have that. And the piece that's missing, based on what we were just saying, and I don't think we've
talked about this, is the fact that, you know, everything is
being disintermediated, disruptive. So like who are we with Chat GPT? What is reading and writing? And, you know, the technology is coming so quickly. What is the impact of that? I don't have an answer, but we have, BPL has historically been this, and at the same time, technology, hybrid, all the stuff, place and space, all of those things are really more what the current situation is. I don't have the language, and probably.
The sphere of digital engagement is missing from this
Yeah.
draft as it
That's
is.
that's exactly the digital engagement piece.
You know, I was editing this afternoon, which is why you have such a late draft, but I was trying to sprinkle back in some things that didn't seem to make it. But
Would that go here?
it should go somewhere.
I think it should go there.
It can either go, well, the specification section is now going on a lot, so I think it probably needs to go into the what we currently do.
Maybe up here, where it says 25 neighborhood branches will also be critical. Then you could talk about the digital environment.
Well, yeah, I would put it in the first section.
Yeah.
I think we're trying to describe the scope of the project, the rationale for having it. I think part of it is the fact that we're doing so many great things and people don't know exactly what we're doing and we need to focus better. But I think another problem is disruption and understanding what that means for the library and how we.
The dynamic changing world in
Correct.
which we live, which is.
Yeah, I think it could come right after, or in that section, that there's a sentence that begins, understanding which new or existing services the BPL should prioritize. And then that's a fairly long sentence. But at the end of it, you could then, I think, put in a few comments, few sentences about, you know, we recognize that, you know, technology is disrupting the way that libraries traditionally have served their communities. And, you know, the advent of artificial intelligence and the digital world is something that we want to reckon with and try to use and harness for our advantage or something. You know, obviously, somebody can think of some better words, but I think.
Sorry, you were.
No, I was done.
That line today, there are typically over 6,000 programs scattered across the locations.
Yeah.
In every given year. In addition, say there are X number of digital things, like just try to keep it together as much as.
Yeah, I think this came from the website. So to the extent that Lisa and team, you've got more that we can add to these bullet points that go to.
Yeah, and I certainly, I know a lot of work came to this, you know, pull out together.
No, these are great suggestions. If we've got stuff that's not on the website that's specific to digital offerings.
We're trying here to describe who we are and the challenges we face for a consultant. Some of which will make it into the actual strategic planning work, but it's really here enough to describe who we are and our challenges so that they know what they're getting into, basically.
Here's where I thought Priscilla was going, was to. Oh, okay, go ahead.
I like your words better, because you think of this stuff better. Go ahead.
Where I thought she was going was to suggest that there might need to be a set of strategic questions. These are the questions that we're pursuing. So here's what we are, the challenges we're facing, and so we've got a set of priority questions that we're trying to answer out of this project. The requirements and competencies should describe the things that we think are germane to answering the questions.
Yeah, if someone presents and has no idea what the current state of technology and, you know, interconnected world is, then that's probably not someone we're going to want to work with, right?
But I think we need to have it,
Embedded.
we need to,
Make our job life easier by being clear that if whoever's responding doesn't understand
the digital
environment, places and spaces, and, you know, the fact that we have the unhoused, that we have Narcan, you know, all of the
scope of services
that we are a conduit for that. That's one of the things that we're asking.
is that we work in all these places and
Spaces, and even though we're not providing the services, we can, you know, as a source of information for people, we can point people in the right direction.
Now, do we know that there is a problem, like in terms of keeping up with technology? Because the counterpoint to what Ron is saying is we should lay out what we do, and then we want the consultant to figure out what is happening. Like, you know, we certainly have ideas about the structure, but it could be that the benchmarking is like, we're killing it. You know, no other library is touching as many people are doing. I mean, so certainly not to rest on our laurels, but I think we should share some things, but you can't presuppose the answer.
Right.
In a good strategic planning process.
It feels like almost one of the questions that we're trying to answer is how do we future-proof ourselves, right? Things are changing so fast. What is it that we need to be looking at now in order to be the library of the 21st and 22nd and 23rd century?
Yeah, so I like Ron's idea of framing questions that can be answered. I think we do that to some extent here. Right? We lay out the current services. We say that one of the key things that the consultant will do will help us to understand what we should be focusing on, what we shouldn't be focusing on. I do like Priscilla's suggestion of adding something on disruptive technology, because I think that's another key area. So why don't we do that? We can add that into this section. Lisa, you can look and see if there are any other data points that we can build in here, but these are all good comments, and I think there are a bunch of things we can easily do.
There was good language later on somewhere about the isolated, atomized.
Yeah, that's at the bottom.
That's getting to one of these spheres of challenge, like modern society is that. It's challenged by technology and innovation. I think we're still struggling with even though we read it at the start of the meeting, our EDI obligations and how to make that realer. I think the social cohesion, political polarization, and fraying of our global connectivity is all a mess together. So I mean, I don't know how far we want to take a list of questions that are.
I don't think you have to pose every question, but I think you have to say, these are priority illustrative.
How far should library services extend its understanding of ourselves in order to respond to these current pressures? When should it be only in partnership with another organization? Should it be extended enterprise? And then other things that's too far for us.
And then, do you have the money to do it? Question.
I basically think we start with our facade, which is about democracy, free to all, knowledge. I mean, these are the pillars. So we start with what's written on the building. And those questions flow from that, and they are
within our scope. So I think part of a strategic plan
is not, this process isn't, we have to do all these things, but our job is as a convener is to, is a providing.
Pointing people in the right direction. That's a key part of what we do.
So I'm not
worried about, and I'm not worried about the money yet.
That's good to know.
There was, in a previous, last meeting, I learned that there were a number of social workers here. So is that something that should be in the bullets about the way we're reaching people? And did you just say there's Narcan here?
Yeah.
Don't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have all that.
Library staff have been trained who wanted to be trained, and many carry it as a result of that.
So maybe just in terms of reaching people, I think that would be useful information, because that's not typical library. I was surprised a few weeks ago when I heard that. So
yeah, that's a good point.
Maybe add a bullet about those social.
It is now.
It's very typical in large urban public libraries.
Almost as, here's how we're responding to the world right now, right? So we've got 2.1 million people visiting.
Lisa, would you talk about the Human Service Cabinet shift too? Because that to me says something, at least within the city of Boston, going from arts and culture under Mayor Wu's administration. I don't know where that goes.
I think that's a very wise, yes, it's a really good observation. And to your point, Paula, it also speaks to one of the reasons that we would be considering a strategic plan right now. We are now in the Human Services Cabinet. What does that mean? And how do we execute on that?
Because that's a very big question, because that's where the social services sort of.
100%.
And we're.
But we pivoted to that before we moved over to health and human services, because the need was so great.
Yeah.
So,
it's important, but it's not direct. It wasn't directive. It's the library and the librarians and the staff are in touch with what the needs of the community are,
what the needs of the patrons are, and
finds a way. That's why we did what we did.
So in many ways, we morphed to be in that place.
Well, it's a both and.
Right.
It's just good timing that we're in.
And I think the cabinet move is a recognition of that's where our role.
I like making that reference though, Paul. It's a good suggestion, and Heidi, I agree with you in terms of building out the social work aspect. We're currently doing. I know that one point that came through in some of the discussions we had in the interim was making, and we'll come to this in a moment, making sure that we're connecting with staff, understanding the pressures that they're facing, and it seems like one of the things that's coming through loud and clear is that providing those kind of social worker type services is something that can be really challenging and really hard. Anything else on section 1? I feel like we've got some great supplements that we can layer in. Okay, so then we get to section 2. These are the deliverables that the consultant would be asked to provide. And as a straw man, we've come up with a bunch of things here, which I'll take through quickly. And if people find that these resonate, great. If they think that we should change them, that's something we should talk about. So part of this process, it seems, will likely involve collecting data, getting thoughts from various stakeholders. So one thing we suggested was that some sort of a community survey be undertaken to gauge community perspectives on what services existing or proposed are most impactful and most differentiated. Another thing that we suggested was a staff survey that would go to some of the things that I mentioned a moment ago in terms of understanding what matters to staff most, and also what staff find most challenging and what makes it hardest for them to do their job well. We had bracketed here the concept of focus groups. I'm not sure whether that's something that we ultimately look to have as part of this engagement or not, and we can come back to that. It seemed like a landscape review would almost be a requirement by necessity. We would want, I think, whoever is doing this work to understand what other peer urban libraries are doing and how we might leverage some of their experiences. And then, of course, we get to the strategic plan itself and the mission statement and the marketing plan. And we've talked about previously the fact that ultimately it may be a different firm that does the marketing piece because the skill set of that firm or that consultant may be by necessity different. So let me pause there. Are we missing things? Do people think there are elements of this list that don't make sense?
I like that you've captured community input in a way that is less free for all necessarily, free to all, but not free for all. I like the fact that you've captured staff input. There are 3 co-equal stakeholder groups that I'm still framing this out in my head, but it feels like library leadership, the trustees of which you are an extension, and city leadership are like the 3 sort of guiding stakeholder groups that should have a more formalized input beyond community survey and staff survey. That's as far as I've got with the thought. I'm unclear. I mean, focus groups would clearly be one way to do that. And that's even before we touch affiliate conversations that we've mentioned earlier, or at least, the fact that the fund being the primary fundraiser in this, and there are other affiliates too. Like you start to peel back the layer of the onion, and it starts to get very complicated. But it strikes me from a strategic oversight point of view that those are 3 entities that get called out somehow formally.
Do you call it affiliates and friends, Dave? Would
You have to speak up. What?
would you call affiliates and friends? So you have leadership trustee, BPL leadership trustees, city leadership affiliates and friends?
Yeah, I mean,
Comprehensive enough? Or?
Yeah.
A lot of it isn't in where you have focus groups here.
Well, how do you guys do, like if you were at APT or something and you were going about this, would you start off
You know, I mean, some people,
People do a gap analysis, they do the landscape thing,
then they look
then they do the deep dive to find out where the gaps are, right? So kind of the sequence of this, you know, like what I would typically do as a consultant would be to find out, okay, what's everybody else? I want to find out what the current situation is, but it's always the current situation based up against some sort of a model, some sort of a framework. I have an idea of kind of like that, not as a determinant, but as a directive, to be able to bounce something off of. And then the conversations, whether it's a focus group or something, is more like testing different things. I mean, you're soliciting information, but you're actually either testing, verifying, or something like that. But, you know, I mean, I've been out of this game for a while, so that's why we have you guys.
Might come later.
Yeah, a few thoughts about that. So, you know, one, I think this is why the strategic questions are important, because it has a lot to do with tactics, and how you pursue the questions. To say something really nitpicky here, the first 4 bullets on the list are kind of activities. Yeah, they'll produce something. The last 3 are products. So you could imagine that you'd be saying to contractors, we imagine that this scope would include these kinds of activities. We need to decide how prescriptive we want to be, though. You could say, look, we imagine it will entail this, but we would like you to tell us the scope and sequence required to answer these questions. I think my question for particularly David, Pam, others in the room, what needs to be produced that you think will be incredibly actionable for you? It doesn't have to be the strategic plan or whatever, because you and I were involved in a process where I think all of these things happened to produce Imagine Boston 2030, and most of Boston can't tell you what Imagine Boston 2030 is.
For me. I love it.
I was very excited about that.
I was excited, but for a lot of people, it became a doorstop.
Absolutely. You know, and Dr. Deming said, you know, the individual never created anything, so I really don't. They don't have any answers. You know, we ask people what they want, people don't know. I mean, they can only say that.
so
I like your about that, though, sorry to interrupt, putting here are the products, we'll let you figure out the way to achieve
Tell us how to
those.
get there.
And what you're gonna need in terms of, here are our constituent groups that we wanna have involved, and you tell us how you wanna work through that process, but I agree with you, Priscilla. That you do wanna have, you can't just go with a blank slate. Because it can be very challenging.
Yeah, I would have thought the natural way to, I agree with you, Priscilla, that I would have thought the natural way to sequence this is for someone to do a landscape review. You know, what is the New York Public Library, what is the LA Public Library doing that we're not? I know you already, I think we're already tracking this, the staff track this.
I don't think that's going to help. I mean, I think it's relevant and nice, but it's not going to be strategically changing anything about this work. It's going to, exactly.
Things as everybody else. I mentioned that to you, Christian, like we're doing everything that those large urban public libraries are doing, and there's so many groups that David's a part of that I think the more important thing I mentioned to you was like funding that they're getting from either whatever the constituent, you know, the city, the state, the feds, the private.
Yeah, I mean, I guess.
Staffing.
Maybe we're doing all the same things, but the libraries are different. So there must be some differences that, I mean, and maybe it's a matter of funding, maybe it's a matter of communications. I would have thought there's some meaningful learnings that could be gleaned from.
Yeah, so like Denver has a stronger social work program than we do. Richmond has a much stronger staff engagement model than we do. New York has a much better branch system. You know, Philly at least used to have a stronger fundraising. Like we know all that. That's not going to materially change what the strategic plan, document, or process is going to tell us. I don't need to be benchmarked against our peers. I know what that information is. What we need to do is chart a course that takes us forward.
And if I could just sort of tag on to what David's saying, I think that, you know, sure, best practices are great. But I think something that we really have to look at very carefully is where we sit in the landscape of the city, right? So what is it that we as the Boston Public Library bring that is unique? So for example, we have homework help.
Nutrition lab.
Well, no, just if we have a homework help thing, and that Paul has done yeoman's work in getting us tons of money. But it's not robust, and we have a sneaking suspicion that it's because there's nothing that is unique about it. There's no core differentiator to that program. So let's back up a second and say, okay, what is it that we can do as the library that will impact the residents of the city of Boston and the Commonwealth more in a way that nobody else is doing? Because we are unique. I mean, there is no other institution in the city or the Commonwealth like us. What does that actually mean in people's day-to-day lives? I feel like that's the question, a very important question that we need to answer. And to that end, something, and I know I reviewed this already and it's just occurring to me, we're not talking about asking people who are not users of the library. I'd like to know what the rest of the city thinks.
Which is the majority of people that donate to the library, believe it or not.
So where would you,
Really?
They're really not using, they're not patrons of the library.
They like the idea of the library.
Well, they believe in the mission of the
as
library.
which is a civic good,
Yeah.
so.
But is it that they're outside of Boston? So
No, I mean,
Because
it's a
in Boston, they just
combination
don't.
of different things. I mean, a lot of them come here, don't get me wrong, but it's not as if they're coming here for social services or other types of resources or, they are checking out books, actually, a lot online. So but I do think.
They're users.
They're users.
They're I would say they're users or their belief. I do agree with David about the landscape, and I mentioned it to you when we talked, because hearing and being a part of a national group of foundation folks like myself, large urban libraries, very rural, we're all doing the same things, and I really don't think it would be helpful in a strategic, and I agree with Lisa, it's sort of how are we aligning with the city of Boston's strategic priorities, whether it's youth engagement or homelessness, how do we as the library support those key strategic priorities of the mayor, the city? Because we are a part of the city. I mean, it feels more if we can, kind of dig into that a
So
little
that's, to me, that's like a current,
Landscape.
current understanding of our role.
Yeah.
And then also posing the question, like, what's missing from that? But there is a current alignment with the city.
Yes.
And I think what I'm hearing you say is, obviously we could do more. So maybe again, that gets posed as a question. I want to come back to the landscape thing, and I'm hearing you loud and clear that it's not helpful to the staff, but I don't want us to hire a consultant who hasn't done the damn landscaping.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's
No consultant that we are gonna
hire unless they know what every.
Yeah, that resonates with me too. I'm not suggesting that staff don't closely follow what all other major pure libraries do and that we're not doing similar things, but I do think the consultant needs to understand what other libraries are doing. And I would think there are meaningful differences in terms of funding and emphasis, and those may be of relevance to the work that we're.
So then, in a way, you're actually sort of moving this to competencies and requirements.
Well, I
Only
think
in
the
part
yeah.
though, because I think, yes, we want to have a consultant who has done their work, right?
Right.
But it does strike me that you're also saying, we at least want to scan or sanity check against what other people are doing?
Well, I guess as a former consultant, it would be surprising to me that there's nothing at all we can learn from a landscape review. I mean, I would have thought that like an objective third-party consultant looking in, might have some perspectives on how things are done differently. And I would have thought that's a natural part of the work that we're doing. But the comments that other people are making that you've made, David, and you, Lisa, and you, Paula, about understanding how we fit into, what we do that is differentiated and what others in the city can't do, and how we fit into what the city is envisioning. I think that's really important, and that's not fully captured in here, so we should choose that out.
And there's a contrast point to that, which I think is important to bring out, which is also how we are uniquely different from many of our peers, because other than New York, there is no other public library that serves as a research library. We were the first ever chartered public library in the country. And we also serve as the library for the Commonwealth in the state, playing partially the role of a state library that is played by the actual state library in 49 other states So there's dimensionality to our identity that goes beyond being purely benchmarked against our peers and our, as we talked about, LA has a great equity plan, for example. I mean, there are things about the other peers that are, they're right now, they're really better than us. You roll the clock back to 2016 when we opened the Central Library after its renovation. Oh my God, we were of that moment, the most impressive central library among urban libraries in the country. So there's a little leapfrogging thing that goes on with our peers on each particular topic.
And so what could be more interesting, possibly if we're wed to the idea of the landscape, is to include other kinds of organizations in the landscape, because you're not competing with libraries on everything. Sometimes you're competing with accelerators. Sometimes you're competing with online platforms, community health centers. So include them in the landscape. And maybe it's almost kind of pro forma to take a picture of the world of libraries, because we've got kind of some standard view of them, but ask more provocative questions about outliers. If you've become a multi-service organization, whom else are we competing with in these spaces?
And if we did that against the three sectors that we have the most in common with, arts and culture, education, lifelong learning, civic services and human services, that would be really, really, I think, insightful to know, how do we play a role that differentiates us from the other players in each of those three subsectors? That would be
Because that's
really
what we get
empowering.
asked a lot too.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We get asked a lot about that.
So this, so this is very interesting language to me, is that what we're talking about differentiating. So we're looking at, if we were gonna do a prey map, right? If we do our mapping, we map ourselves in terms of who we like, competitors, similarities, characteristics, I mean, that's what we should do in our marketing.
To be able to look at it,
Look at where we position, where we are and who our overlaps are.
Do you guys still do that in consulting?
What do you call it now?
That's a Venn diagram.
Huh?
And I,
No, it's X, and then we should call it a prey map.
2x2s.
You're talking about like a scatter plot.
A scatter plot of characteristics, use, all that stuff. And you could look at it all the dimensions. And the benefit of doing that and having it populated is that it then translated into, then was used later for the communications and the branding.
That's what we used to do with it.
So it was really, really important to have that clarity around where we fit and where it's position on that. Position.
I do like your point, Ron, that, we need to be pretty open-minded. We need to be very open-minded about other organizations when we're doing this landscape review, whatever we want to call it. Because I think that goes to the whole question of what we should be doing in the future and not being locked into the things that we've done in the past.
And sort of a little more granularly going from Ron's big galaxy brain idea, but also we need to be thinking about other research libraries and other libraries that hold special collections. I mean, like in that space, we're competing with the Library of Congress, not in Harvard, not just other urban libraries. We are very unique in that place. So let's not forget about that.
So I guess this has been to me at least, an informative and constructive conversation. I don't think we should have a pedantic landscape review that says, the New York Public Library is doing this. If you thought about this, of course you thought about that. But I think we should.
Thought about it.
But it seems like we need the consultants to be familiar with what other urban public libraries are doing. And we need to think about a landscape review holistically, to think about, all sorts of other services in different quadrants.
But I'm gonna go back to Ron's point, which is there's sort of an inconsistency in this section, which is there's the main deliverable, which is the strategic plan and the mission statement, and then there's sort of the way we get there. And I don't know, it seems to me a little, and I hadn't thought about this until you mentioned it, but it's a little confusing because in some ways we're micromanaging the process. Like I said, we want you to do a staff survey, we want you to do a landscape review. Well, maybe they'll come in incredibly competent knowledgeable consultants and say, want us to do a landscape review for what?
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that needs to be a deliverable.
No, I think those first four things become, like, we don't want to be over prescriptive, so it's like, please present your methodology that
Yes.
tells us, you will
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, they're basically inputs to the.
And things such as
Yeah.
surveys.
Or the population, the target population.
Yeah, the stakeholder groups or whatever. Yeah. No, I
I recommend moving, the deliverable is the strategic plan.
Yep.
and Maybe the mission statement.
Yep.
Start there.
Yeah.
Proposed tactics might include
Yep.
all the things we just talked about.
And again, David, if you've got an imagination for what you
sounds
want
good.
to see produced, that will be more actionable than what we think of as a strategic plan. Let's be specific about that, because that's one of the things you want to put on the table for a consultant to ask, can you do this for me? Can you produce this thing that is going to be of infinite value to me?
Somewhat like an action plan or something.
It could be an action plan. I saw a playbook referenced here, but if there's something that is kind of more than that general language that elicits something that doesn't always give us what we want.
I mean, it has to, in my mind, generate the guide that Paula and I and others will use to shape fundraising efforts. It has to tell us what our focus and our priorities are as an institution in order to serve these other things. It also has to tell us the staff skills and whether it's developing existing staff or new types of hire. It also has to tell us, well, instead of 500 people, God, you want to do all this? You want 500 people? It's going to take 600 people to do what's called for. It has to cut the cloth to our measure in a way that is achievable. So I think it also has to inform us about where, it has to be a mirror. It actually has to be a mirror to us, because this is a professional library science and librarianship of the whole of the library that is struggling in a very positive way, but is come through 20 years of transition that is only accelerating. And where is that going next? And we want existing staff and new staff to find their place on that journey that is compelling and not frightening. So those are the ingredients in terms of what, like if we end up with a document that's very pretty, like our own compass plan or other examples that have been mentioned, that doesn't maybe tell us these things, then it will have been in vain.
Yeah.
Maybe not entirely, but it will largely be.
So this is great, first of all. So David, let me just put context to what Ron laid out a little while ago. 20 years ago, would you have thought that this library would be doing what we're doing today outside of the usual traditional Boston library?
No.
It would not have gone through your
And
mind.
Amy and Bernie, who were in this seat before me, would
Would
say
that be the
no.
same case in New York, Chicago, Philly?
Yeah.
Right. And so in this landscape thinking, are any of those other libraries in the same type of unique situation we are here, where we are crosswalking with human services, arts and culture, education?
With varying degrees, I think, it's interesting to watch the nuances of a particular urban political environment, where, in Chicago, when Rahm Emanuel was mayor, he insisted we're going to do X number of branches with housing, because that's where the thing is going to be. I think Denver continues to stand out in my mind with regard to the social services outreach. And those are partially all driven by library staff reacting to need that they see, but it's also partially shaped by positive political reality that's happening on the ground. So you see shifts of different alignment. And some are closer to their city leadership or county leaderships than others. Like John Zabo's official title is what, county librarian, and Chicago is city librarian, and Chicago is the commissioner of libraries, and someone else has a libraries and arts title. So I'm sorry, I'm rambling now, but I don't see a concentration of one direction moving that's happening.
So, but in many ways, we're unique in some ways compared to the other cities, based on the fact that.
And they're unique in their way.
Yeah, they're unique in their, so what I was thinking when I asked that first question was, would it behoove us in this exercise, not that we have a crystal ball, but based on what we've seen and where things might be going, how they might come back to us and say, if in the next 10 years, this is where the areas are going to be of need, concentration, and these are your three interior partners, arts, education, human services, where we need to make sure that we're in sync with them and where we need to leverage what we're doing and where we might need more from them or less from them, where they can get out of the way or where we can really want them to embrace what we're doing. Follow?
Yeah. Would you go as far as to say we need, a socio-political analysis of what future Boston looks like? Like we all know at some point there'll be waves of climate migrants happening. It's already happening. If we know that in, year X or year Y, that really starts to go through a massive tipping point, then maybe it's the library beefing up its citizen immigration services, it's pathways for new arrivals towards participating in society. Right now, we know
the decline in our population, the census
Are you talking
data.
about the city?
The census, Massachusetts.
Oh, that's, yeah.
And the need for more workforce preparedness because immigrants are underutilized or underemployed.
average age of our population is continuing to rise in a way that over the next 10 to 20 years, unless something else comes in behind, it's the senior services that will be at top of mind.
There'll also be climate impacts in Boston.
Right.
I assume basement which will flood at some point is well reinforced.
No, right?
The swimming pool.
The land.
And so,
Adding services.
And then workforce development for the lifeguards.
yeah. But I only posit that because I think part of it, we have to at least be cognizant of what might be.
Yeah.
So that we're not just thinking short-term what is without knowing what might be the 5, 6 things that might impact what we're doing. And so that we have to at least be prepared in some frame of mind. If it shifts, we're at least ready with the contingency plan. I'm just putting that on the table for consideration.
That was a good thing about 2030, the demographics and taking a look at through each of the SMS. We knew what was going to be happening in different neighborhoods, and you could, so we need that information to be able to talk about our 25 branches, to have a sense of the outflows, inflows, with the programs, if they're little kids, older kids, this kids, that is what's going to drive what the programming is all going to be.
But I also think that we can be bold enough to, as a committee, that we say that the Boston Public Library remains relevant and connected to everyone's life.
And gives
them a sense of humanity, well-being.
And, causes
them to dream and inspire, whatever. We can, as we continue to talk.
Have something that we have as
committee.
Our vision
for the library. What do we want to see? Because that way, when we're interacting with the with the consultants and talking about, you know, the future of BPL, you know, we are connected to, we have to be connected to that, our vision ourselves. What do we want to see as possibility?
Yeah, that certainly resonates with me. I think we,
Okay.
yeah, please.
I'm just, the marketing, and Lisa's here because she can address it. This is sort of a product, but we're not really sure it's a product, the marketing plan and communication. I know Lisa would agree, really believe that that's so powerful, and I don't know how it would be, I feel it would be really important to have that coming on the heels of a strategic plan, and we don't forget about it because, and we are funding it because I think that, you know, people don't, we just don't, we need to get the word out. So I think, you know, I don't know how we kind of make that like really.
Yeah, but by bracketing it, I wasn't suggesting that that's not important. I completely agree, Paul. That's one of the most important pieces of the puzzle in my view. I bracketed it just because I wasn't sure what else might have been underway. So.
Okay.
I think this should lay a foundation for that work. I don't think it should try to include it or do it.
Isn't that a separate set of
Kristen,
competencies?
he had actually gotten my input on it, and I had sort of raised some concerns that absolutely there should be a broad marketing communications plan
Sure.
after, and it's not clear to me that the competency of
Right. No, I
the
get it.
consultancy that does strategic communication would also lend itself to communications.
Yes.
And this library, this institution deserves to have a really, really good strategic communications plan. So I don't necessarily want them to just try, because everybody thinks they can do the communications.
Yeah.
I just don't want to lose sight of it at the end.
Right.
Oh, have no fear. Have no fear.
So
Out the language for that
No, I
reason.
think,
But
yeah, that's a good.
And I just want to be mindful of the time. I think we have 9 minutes left here. So the deliverable section, the comments that people made all made good sense to me. So we can restructure this and add some of the new elements that were recommended. Otherwise, in terms of competencies and requirements and the like, I don't know if people have other reactions to this proposal that they wanted to describe here. Or not. It might be helpful, Lisa, for us to see, well, I guess we talked about the competencies earlier. So is there something that we could see by way of the evaluation
Yes.
form? I mean, I think that might be.
Comment about the competencies.
Yes, please.
And it goes to a point that I made to you, Christian, when we talked. And my point to him was we may want to think about kind of traditional strategy firms and design firms. What I might say in the competencies is that we would value firms with design competencies and backgrounds, because it strikes me that this is kind of a civic design project. I've not seen many great ones, to be honest. My experience is that strategists are like BASF. They don't make the thing, but they make the thing better. What they don't do is reimagine things for the most part. So if you want some folks who are going to help you reimagine, I would argue you need folks with more design chops.
What do you mean by design? I don't know.
So one, there's a whole discipline around human-centered design and the process of going from identifying who you're making the thing for, kind of rapid fire solutions and prototypes and imagining all of the things that could be, and almost in some ways not being wed to form and function at the beginning, but placing community or person or an archetype at the center of that thing and then designing around it. Whereas I think by contrast, and this was certainly true in the education work that we did, whenever we would talk about reinventing school, strategists would start with the assumption of school. So it's no surprise to me that the thing that we wound up with at the end that we called a redesign was still school, when that was not, at least it wasn't my intent, but it wasn't many people.
So for those of us who aren't as familiar with this, it's almost like thinking outside the box. I mean, it was-
Yeah, and there's a discipline to it. People who do it for a
And
living.
it's fun.
Thinking without a box.
Yeah, I think that's,
Thinking with-
that resonated with me when we discussed it,
Yeah.
Ron. I think it's a really good thing to
That is-
find, and it's something that we should encourage people to
Yeah.
emphasize. I think there are a few variables that have to remain constant, right? Like, no matter how much we want to think out of the box, we're going to remain the Library of the Commonwealth and a research library, but there are lots of other variables that can be moved.
But the funding, being the Library of the Commonwealth and being,
Who we are. Right now, we're in a narrow funding framework when it could be something else. I don't know what it could be, but it could be something else.
Yeah.
The other thing that we don't have any place in here is the fact that we are a union shop.
That's a really good
I
point.
mean, that's,
There are constraints.
you know, that's critical, and that's
has to do,
with, when we think about resources, when we think about career development, when we think about the role of the librarians and what they're doing and when they're doing it and what they feel motivated to do.
Right.
that's a critical piece. So when we think those stakeholders,
Those stakeholder groups have,
has got to include,
I don't know,
is it the union or?
Yes,
The union.
Like,
I mean, like, that's what we did at GM.
yeah.
I mean, they're part of our world. They're, they can hold things up and they can speed things up too. So I think they are both an asset and a constraint, just like any of the other functions.
Well, what I would propose, I know we're running short on time here, what I would propose is, I know David and Lucy, you have a few interim edits. I'm happy to take the updated version and implement the changes that we all discussed here. And then we can recirculate it and hopefully get to a point where we're collectively comfortable to get it finalized as an RFP so we can get it posted relatively soon if that works.
Yeah, at this stage of the process, the other most important thing to push over the line is the selection criteria. We can collectively work on email to get that out of this document into a framework. I don't think it has to wait for another meeting.
Yep.
But in my experience of these things, that's the other next thing. Because once the scope is set and that's set, then you and Lisa, you can start the clock on the
And that's
2-week
the
period.
scorecard, right?
Yeah.
do we have a template for that? Does it,
Somebody must have done this before. So what's the time period are we talking? We talking about 5 days or 7? How long is it gonna take us to do this?
if we were in business, we'd get it.
Done on Monday.
Some businesses, I mean, sometimes you have to go on, you have to chain, and, you know.
I think we should try to do it in a week or so. I can update
By next Monday.
the RFP quickly in the next day or two, or part B of the RFP, I should say, and then, maybe Lisa and the team could create the scorecard based on the criteria here, if that's not too hard to lift, then we can just agree to get it done over email.
What are our public obligations? Like public meeting obligations?
You are sitting in it.
I know, but if we could do everything else online, is that okay?
It's all public documents.
So our
everything-
personal email, like at the town meeting?
We don't.
understand.
Anything that we send to you, yes, that is public.
If there's,
So it's fine, the answer is it's fine.
Yes.
and also,
Yeah, we don't have to have public meetings to take every action, so I think if we
Yep.
conclude over email that we're fine proceeding, we can proceed notwithstanding.
And
what
then
we've
it's a
done.
public document. anyway.
Correct.
Correct.
I can also put it on the website along with meeting materials as an updated version and the date that it was updated.
Since there is the holiday Passover in Easter, do you want to?
I think we can't do it
Let's,
Monday.
why don't we try to get it done and by the end of the week after Easter, if that works
Friday
for
the
you,
14th.
Passover. Is that Friday the 14th? As long as it's not Friday the 13th, that's fine. And I'm sorry, Jose, I don't mean to deprive you of covering any new business. I think this was basically the
I think
business.
this is all new business. Unless anyone has new business.
Anything else?
There is no public comment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. This is really helpful and a really interesting meeting. Any other comments before we close? Or motion to adjourn?
Thank you.
All right, we're adjourned.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
Oh, great.
David, in my estimation,
Christian, you were right on the nose. You would be.
Your
Feel like
question.
structure.
Yep.
Very much.